Hello everybody and welcome to The Key, where we discuss ways to optimize your vehicle program for your drivers on the road. My name is Lee Adam and I'm a vehicle program expert here at CarData. I'm joined by Maddie Beelan, the Senior Manager of Customer Success here at CarData. Hi Maddie.
Hi Lee, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here. So today we have a very interesting topic. We're going to be discussing taking the leap of faith, making the transition between company cars and reimbursement, transitioning to personal vehicles and choosing the right reimbursement program for you. It can be scary. It can be quite scary. But today we're going to be discussing effective transition management to ensure that your drivers and your managers are supported when making this somewhat of a daunting change. So let's start off by discussing some disadvantages of company cars. These will probably sound quite true to you, Maddie, as you've heard a lot of customers discuss. So first and foremost, company cars are quite costly. They're very expensive. They're depreciating assets. Whether they're leased and owned, they come with a lot of burden to manage. Whether that's through a fleet management organization or an in-house fleet manager, they're quite time consuming and they tend to suck a lot of money out of the organization. That also correlates to the risk involved with company cars. There's the insurance element and paying for accidents, whether it's the employee or somebody else who's driving the car. And then ultimately, they're not very flexible or scalable with change. When there's employee turnover, when you have to recondition the car, often these assets are laying stagnant. They're not a great use of company dollars. Of course, fleets are sometimes a great option. For branded cars, for example, or when a personal vehicle approach couldn't be used, such as for rigged vehicles or for CDL drivers, for example. But when a personal vehicle approach can be used, we're seeing a lot of organizations consider opting for a tax-free reimbursement approach. So when this happens, it's really important to ask the question, how do I effectively transition between these two approaches? So Maddie, let's first start about talking about the driver's perception. When companies are making the transition to a reimbursement model, how do the drivers typically feel about making a switch like this?
A lot of them come with a lot of fears of am I going to be whole? Is this going to cost me money versus getting a benefit that I've always had of a fleet vehicle? They're very nervous. They don't know what's coming. They don't understand it. It's going to be a challenge for them, and they come with mostly fear. We're not met with excitement generally. It's generally met with fear pre-training.
Fair, right? A lot of the time, this concept of moving to a personal car can seem scary. Drivers have this hard asset in their hand. They're given it as a benefit often from their company, and they're fearful about what it could mean for them and their total benefits package, for example, if they're not receiving it in the same way. Mm-hmm. Interesting. Let's come back to that. I'm curious to hear your perspective from these employees' managers, right? The administrators rather of the current fleet program. What are their fears?
Yeah, their fear is employee turnover. Are they going to get a lot of negative feedback, or are their employees going to stop focusing on their jobs and now just start talking about this and this be the focal point, and they'll be upset, and managers don't want their employees to be upset. That's the first and foremost. They want to keep them happy. So they're really afraid of those negative consequences or the negative feedback that they might get. They're not sure if this is going to come with extra work for them to manage, how this plays out. It's a lot of unknowns, and so they have that fear as well.
Mm-hmm, of course. And all these fears are really valid, right? Especially when stepping into such an unknown universe. So it's really important for our partners to be able to rely on us, CarData, as the reimbursement experts to help them achieve their goals, right? And we know that every program has different goals. Mm-hmm. So when making the transition, what does an effective and appropriate process look like for our partners, and how does CarData help our partners navigate through this process?
I mean, the first and foremost, you need to put a plan in place, and it needs to be a realistic timeline. We do find a lot of people are trying to rush their change management, and coming from a fleet transition, this is something that cannot be rushed. It needs to be very thought out. It needs to be well planned for timely communications. Especially, you need to start understanding what type of lease type you have. Do you have an open or closed one? For example, you can really build a better program and do a successful transition if you align those along the timeline that you do want to make that transition. You don't have to transition your whole fleet all at once. Your leases might come up at different times. You can do step-by-step approaches to a transition. That's always the case. We've seen a lot of companies give a deadline to say, hey, this is the timeline that you have to transition. Here's the timeline you have to buy a vehicle. Sometimes you can look at selling those company cars to your employees at a discounted rate. That adds a perceived benefit as well, and an extra benefit to kind of get enthusiasm in the transition. If you can buy the car that we've previously held for you, it can now become your asset if you want it to be. So really putting that plan in place is really important, and this is something that CarData helps with. We put the timelines, we help with the communication, we help with building out brand new rates for your drivers to make sure that they're still whole, that they don't see this as a loss to them, that they get excited about being able to drive the car that they want to drive and get reimbursed for that vehicle that they're driving. Now they don't have to have maybe 2 cars sitting in their driveway and one doesn't get moved, and now they can just have 1 car. It's a lot less work for them, not having to kind of do maintenance on both and track all of that. So that's something that CarData helps with a lot. We build company policies for them. That's really important as well.
Yeah, it sounds like it's really important to be able to rely on a knowledgeable partner, right? To say, okay, I'm not a reimbursement program expert. I don't know what program I should be on. I don't know how to design it, but let me rely on CarData, for example, to help navigate the transition, help us get there. And this should reign true to you as well. When organizations are making the transition over to CarData, whether they're on a fixed and variable rate reimbursement or a favor program, or they're pursuing a tax-free car allowance approach, they are doing it for a reason, right? Something triggered it, whether it's, and I know you probably heard about, it's an accident, or we found somebody who their wife or their kid was driving the car on the weekends, or we found out that we're bleeding an extra $2 million a year. We need to do something with it instead of downsizing, for example, right? There's always a goal, and it's really important for us as partners to be able to understand that goal and then effectively build to it in a way that best aligns with their timeline, right? You mentioned tiered approaches, what I think is a really great thing to note is, especially if you're in a lease program, one of the most common questions that we get, even in the pre-sales process, is, hey, like my cars don't have the same turnover period, right? I might have a group of cars that are going this year, and I have another group of cars that are supposed to be turned over next year. How do I approach this? And you mentioned a couple strategies, pursuing a tiered approach, having an education process for drivers where they feel confident about what their rates are and why their rates are and what even is a reimbursement program. I think that's so important, in addition to helping them navigate between the options to transition, right? If they own cars, sell them back. If you own cars and you don't want to sell them back to your employees, you can sell them to the market. There's so many options, and relying on an expert like yourself who've done so many transitions really helps people feel less alone in the process and excited about taking advantage of the benefits that they're doing it for, right? Whether it be the risk reduction, the cost reduction, et cetera. Really great point. Now, we talked a little bit about what CarData can do to help, but in your experience, what is the most meaningful element or the most important thing to remember when you're pursuing a fleet transition with a partner?
Yeah, I think the most important thing to remember is that this is daunting for your employees. It's not a simple, hey, just let them know and they'll be fine. Right. It's a daunting task, and in making sure that you tackle those challenges head on, you address them head on, you call them out and say, we understand that this will be daunting. We understand that you may have fears associated with not having a company car anymore, with having to either purchase your own car, with what your reimbursement rate's going to be. Making sure that you address them as a whole to say, why are we making this change? What's the benefit to you as an individual person? And coming at it with empathy and making sure that they understand those factors. Because without the understanding, that's really the area that can lead to an unsuccessful transition.
Oh, absolutely. And with that being said, what are some factors that should be considered when organizations are deciding what reimbursement program they choose and how to build their vehicle policy effectively?
Yeah, they should really be looking at, what are the goals of it? Are you really trying to get tax savings? Is that the goal? Are you trying to reduce your risk? A lot of most companies come to us from fleet transitions are because they had an accident and they had to give a huge payout to somebody. So a lot of them are coming with that risk reduction. So knowing what insurance levels that you should be building, consulting with us on what insurance do you need to have to reduce that risk? How does this reduce risk? What do the employees need to do to make sure that you're reducing risk? So which program is designed best to do that? Making sure you understand the reason for the transition, but then also what are the goals going into it post-transition?
Awesome. So true. And ultimately, there are a lot of reimbursement strategies out there. I mentioned fixed and variable rate reimbursement, so favor. We also mentioned tax-free car allowance. And I think it's important to note that when organizations come to us and they want to make this change, they can rely on you, right? They can rely on their customer success manager to help decide what program is right for them. So in your experience, what would make a fixed and variable rate program, such as a favor program, a good choice for a company car transition?
Yeah, it's really a good choice when you're looking for something that's cost effective and you want something that can be tax-free for everyone. So do you have people that are driving high mileage? That's a great program for these types of individuals because they can get reimbursed no matter the choice that you make, whether you want it to be a rich program or not, they can get reimbursed tax-free. If you're really looking at compliance as well and making sure that they're following the guidelines set by your policy because you want to reduce that risk, you don't want them driving a 10-year-old vehicle, this helps get them into that kind of policy and into compliance and making sure that you do reduce their risk. We check insurance for you. We make sure that everyone always has their insurance up to date. That's a really big factor. So favor is really a good option essentially for most companies. It's good for that cost savings is kind of the big reason that most companies take that jump and for high mileage employees that drive.
Yeah, so good. And I think also when making the transition, right, for drivers, like, what's in it for them? And when we get asked that question, I think it's so important to note that favor is widely considered the fairest approach, right, Maddie? So it's because really it leverages geographical and vehicle-specific information that's required to do the job. So we mine market data, we mine fuel information. We're looking at all of this data every day to make sure that our system has adequate information in place that's being used to actually calculate rates, right?
Yes.
And really, typically, the education process in making these transitions, it involves showing them how both the ownership and the operating expenses associated with business use are being leveraged to create the rate, right? How can effective education of drivers in terms of how rates are created and how rates are managed help drivers with their buy-in?
That's one of the most important factors is understanding how a rate's built, understanding what's the difference between the fixed portion of what they're receiving every month versus the variable portion, understanding how much goes into what's the cost for my insurance, seeing that takes into account where I live. Somebody in California will be pretty upset if they think that their reimbursement's based off of someone that lives in Texas. It's really important to take into account those differences, that they understand that their taxes are associated with the reimbursement that they get, and how much they drive is taken into account, both on the depreciation factor, but also on the fuel and maintenance side. So this really is kind of the whole point of the program and the whole point of getting adoption is understanding how rates are built so that you can kind of go to your employees and make sure that they understand the benefit to them and that they can get it tax-free. A lot of people miss that factor of, you know what, this is reimbursement. It's not a benefit, which means it's tax-free. If you had a fleet vehicle, you probably had to be paying tax on the personal time that you were putting on that. Whether you were tracking it or not, they would have just applied a tax saying, I just assume that you're spending this much time in your fleet vehicle, which is taxable income. So this is reducing that taxable income that you had kind of before, and it is a benefit to most employees.
Absolutely, such an important point. And also, there is an element of choice that's now applied to drivers, yes. Right? I think you said it before, but it's so genius the way that you framed it. Like, say you want to drive, a minivan, and you want to bring your kids around because that's the lifestyle you lead. There's a flexibility to do that under favor versus living a different lifestyle where you might want a more luxurious car, where your reimbursement might cover a portion of that because, of course, typically it's based on the type of car and the type of driving required for the job, but it allows you that lifestyle flexibility. How does that help in driver transitions and ensuring that everybody feels more confident with the program? Yeah,
it's important. Being able to show the flexibility that not every individual is the same. We're not treating everyone the same. It's treated as an individual basis to say, hey, this is on average, this is what it takes as a vehicle to do the job. But having flexibility and showing that flexibility to your employees gets the buy-in. Most people are going to be very excited about this, that sometimes you have to drive this car that you really hate for work, and so you drive a different car on the side, or the vehicle that your company provided you with doesn't actually fit your lifestyle, and now you're getting taxed for personal time on your fleet car, but then you're also driving a personal car on the side. So you're not actually using the personal time on your company car. So now they've reduced that. They're actually probably saving money in the long run now that they only have to drive one car and only have one in their lifestyle.
It's awesome. And being able to work with our partner organizations and saying, okay, we understand that this is your perception of your employees' perspective. How can we leverage your financial goals and your perception of your employees to build something that is going to, as you mentioned, keep them whole, right? Because favor, for example, isn't stagnant, it's flexible. So how do you recommend that companies and managers alike leverage the flexibility and the strategy behind favor in order to create a vehicle policy and rates that really align with what they're hoping to achieve?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, industry benchmarks are the best point to go for first. Understanding where you fall in play, where you want to kind of play in that field of, do you want to be a leading competitor and how much you're reimbursing is a factor. Do you want to be somewhere in the middle? Do you care? But starting off with industry benchmarks gives you an idea of how much you should be reimbursing. Understanding the type of vehicle that's required to do the job. Do you need a pickup truck, or do you just need a standard vehicle? All of those things come into play, and then you can build those rates off of that. Coming with a budget. How much do you want to be spending on this program? Do you want it to be a rich program? Are you trying to see more tax savings, or are you trying to pass off those tax savings to your employees? Coming with the answers to those questions and understanding your goals helps design that program and those rates that you're getting.
So how do you recommend then that our partners leverage the CarData customer success team in order to ensure that they're hitting their goals and they're effectively transitioning between programs, which can seem daunting?
I mean, asking questions, addressing your concerns, bringing your concerns up to the forefront. The customer success team will be proactive in telling you what their known concerns always are. Sometimes you might not know them, but they'll bring them to the forefront and say, hey, these are things that we've seen in the past. We've done this so many times. The concerns are generally always the same. Making sure that those are addressed and you think about them when you are making the plan. Going off the timelines and the suggested factors that are in play when you do a transition, making sure that you send internal communications at the right time, making sure that employees have the opportunity to ask questions, and using your customer success team to help answer those questions and build those internal PR tools to get adoption and get excitement and enthusiasm into the program.
I love that. I think that's so important, because not only do we need to set the program up, we need to make sure everybody's excited about it. So those internal communication tools, as you mentioned, custom training, using industry benchmarks to prove to your team and to really feel confident that you're doing what's best for your company, but also for your drivers.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Maddie. That was really, really informative. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So today we talked a little bit about the daunting leap, moving between fleet, company cars, and a reimbursement program. But when you leverage your customer success team effectively and you truly understand what you want to accomplish, you can be sure that you're giving your drivers and your company the tools that you need to be successful and to get buy-in. This has been The Key. Thank you so much, and drive safe.